with Tom Tillet, the CEO of Man's Best Friend Therapeutic. He's simplified it these days to MBFT or MBF Therapeutics, but what a great name. And Tom, let's start right there. How did you get that name?
Actually, we were working with someone with some experience in doing these kind of names, and I was working on it at night. My wife looked at me and she said, "Why don't you call it MBF Therapeutics?" And I looked at her and I said, "Why?" She goes, "Man's Best Friends." And I just stopped. That's it.
That's terrific. Well, Tom, so how did you actually get into this world?
It's an interesting story because I had a long career at Rohm and Haas, a big chemical company, worked for them all over the world. And about 20 some years ago, I made the mistake one day of asking my boss at the time what we were doing to prepare for the biotech revolution in the ag area. And he said, "I don't know, Tom, why don't you do it? Why don't you figure it out?" And so he then gave me the resources to bring in Booz Allen and some other really good consultants that enabled us to kind of map out Rohm and Haas's role in this new world, as well as what was going to go on overall. And as you know, Joe, many companies, strategic planning is essentially looking in the rearview mirror and then turning it around and saying, "Oh, the future is going to look like this." But when Monsanto came in with their revolutionary approach to looking at biotech crops, it completely changed the landscape. And so a rethink of everything that was going on needed to be done. And so coming out of that, Rohm and Haas was very fortunate that we were not on the front line of being impacted, but it offered us an opportunity longer term to create an environment for us or a strategy for us in which we could excel. And so, obviously you do a study like this, you have recommendations. My recommendation was we start a biotech business. I also said I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And my boss, John Tollucci, who was a great strategic thinker, said, "Tom, that's fine. I hear you. But at the end of the day," he said, "it's you and you're going to run this." And I said, "This is probably the end of my career at Rohm and Haas." And it was, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it got me into an industry that was just exploding with things going on. And it just so happens that Rohm and Haas had some really unique technology that allowed us to safely and precisely regulate genes in the human body. And so we formed a company that we then later spun out called Reagene. And Reagene then developed the ReaSwitch therapeutic system, which was very successful. It's now in late stage clinical testing for brain cancer and has a fast track designation from the FDA. And so that was really cool, very innovative technology that allowed you to safely and precisely regulate the expression of genes. Unfortunately for me, we were doing this in the midst of a downturn in the gene therapy industry in the early 2000s. And so it was a real struggle to find venture capital that wanted to support it. And we were owned at that point by the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center because of a kind of a unique transaction I had organized to have the company donated to UPMC. And they were great partners, and they funded us to a significant level over several years. But when we began getting into clinical trials, we needed to transition and get additional funding. And that was, 2007, 2006, those were bad times for raising money in gene therapy. And we had an opportunity through an existing relationship to merge what we were doing with Entrexon, who was owned by R.J. Kirk, who was a serial entrepreneur, very successful. And so we did the merger. But as I mentioned to you, at that point, there's not a need for two CEOs in an organization, right? So I took the exit and then started MBF Therapeutics. And because I thought it would be easier and faster and cheaper to do an animal health company than to do a human health company. And that and other myths have passed through my brain, over the past few years. But in a lot of ways, this has been really interesting because there's not a lot of innovation in the animal health business. I was at the JP Morgan conference a year ago, and I heard the CEO of Zoetis brag about the fact that a significant part of their part of their portfolio was 25 years old or older. And I'm thinking, you're bragging about this? This is not, you know, I know from an investor standpoint, it's showing stability, but it's not showing innovation. And so, and initially we were looking at an opportunity for cancer therapeutics in dogs as being a significant opportunity, and it very much is. Because the primary products that are used in that market, even today, are off-label use of chemotherapeutics, which are harsh and toxic, you know, to use, but they're still standard of care. And so with this immunotherapy revolution that's going on, we saw an opportunity to create safer, better products that would have a good setting there. And we were very fortunate in being able to develop a relationship with Wistar Institute in Philadelphia. And they had some really interesting technology that was a novel checkpoint inhibitor that would allow us to then create what we felt was a first-in-class product that would be a foundation for first-in-class products for canine cancer.
Well, and so it sounds like both on the one hand, number of exciting things as it relates to the bioscience with animals. On the other hand, you alluded to the fact that it wasn't as easy as you thought. So Tom, what have the challenges been? Well,
we in-licensed two things initially, this is long before Wistar, and they were a form of immunotherapy. And this was really before checkpoint inhibitors, you know, came up and became major products. But like what can happen, you know, we put them into clinical testing and they failed, right? And at that point, you can always look back and say, okay, the investors, you know, we just write this off, right? And you just shut down the company and you walk away. I'm not built that way. My co-founder, Dr. Lorraine Keller, is not built that way. And we said, no, we're going to find something else. You know, we're going to put this on hold until we can look for something new and different. So CAR T was emerging around this time in 2016, 2017. And we looked at that and we thought, it's a little expensive for dogs. This is not going to work. And then we happened to have a very good relationship with the Wistar Institute. And we went there to hear what they had to say. And they had this very early technology. And we said, we'd like to try this. And so we did a deal to get an option to do some initial clinical studies with it. Those were successful. We then leveraged that into a broader deal with them. And so we have exclusive rights to what they're doing in the animal health world. And so that was very exciting and that was very interesting. But kind of another setback that we had along the way is that they had designed this in a way where it was being delivered using a viral vector, which is very common and is commonly done in humans. What we did not appreciate was that the USDA, who is the one who regulates these kind of products in the animal health world, said, viral vector, we're not, you know, this is not going to look good. And the more we talked to them, the worse it got. And so, unlike, you know, you have a financial advisor who will tell you, you know, past success is not an indication of future success, you know, with his investment. One thing that is very true, past problems with regulators are a great indicator of future problems with regulators. And so one day I finally said, just stop. You know, my team is doing a great job. We're working with Diamond Animal Health to do the manufacturing. They're doing a wonderful job, but I just said, stop. We're not winning this game. Every time we go talk to the USDA, it gets worse. And so we need to back up and we need to try something different. And so we then, you know, looked at non-viral vectors and found a way of using those. And kind of simultaneous with that, the whole infectious disease world was beginning to open up, and we began to appreciate the fact that what we were doing in modulating the immune system had value far beyond cancer. And whereas the canine cancer market is an attractive market, high value, it's low volume. And so, you know, that market is this big. The infectious disease market is this big, right? And so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, okay, we need to adjust. And we're still developing our canine cancer portfolio. but we decided to focus on looking at infectious diseases. And within that, we chose the swine market because it's a very highly integrated market. Companies like Smithfield Food are fully integrated from raising the pigs up through production. And so probably there's less than 20 major swine producers in the US that represent 90% of the business. It doesn't take a lot to be able to sell directly to 20 people, right? And so we thought there's a need. The African swine fever problem was beginning to explode in China. And the African swine fever was essentially the Ebola virus of pigs, okay? And there's nothing that effectively controls it today. It has a 97% mortality rate in pigs. And it was devastating pork production in China, where half the world's pigs were grown in China. And it was devastating pork production there. So, that was clearly an opportunity. And we said, we think that what we're doing with novel T-cell vaccines is the right approach. And that's an opportunity, which then led us to then do other things, including what we did with Smithfield.
Well, Tom, you tell a great story about your relationship with Smithfield and how it unfolded. I'd love for you to share it with us.
It is a great story. And it was very interesting the way it came about, because we're kind of new. Even though we've got several people on our team who are swine experts and swine vaccine experts, this was still, for me, kind of a new area. And so we began, I thought, why not call Smithfield and see if they would be willing to work with us? And as we began this conversation, and we had a couple teleconferences with them, and this is pre-Zoom, right? So you're just talking on the phone. It became apparent that there was a real opportunity. So about a year ago, my team came down here to where I'm at today in North Carolina, and we began to sit down and have a discussion with them. And fortunately for us, the chief scientific officer at the time for Smithfield Foods is a guy by the name of Dr. Terry Coffey. And Terry's a very smart guy and knows how to think strategically. And he looked at what we were offering and what we could do, and saw that there was the potential there to do something significantly better than what they've had an opportunity to do thus far. And so I said, Terry, why don't we collaborate on this? Why don't we work together and come up with this? He said, sure. He said, we got lots of pigs, and we can then, and so our role in this collaboration is we create the kind of the novel vaccine products. They do the clinical testing in their pigs. And then we collaborate on the work that's done at the NC State Vet School with Dr. Toby Kaiser, who's an outstanding swine immunologist, and to then analyze those results. And so that's about to come to fruition here in the next couple of days, that we're about to start a clinical trial with them. And we're really excited about that. It's a win-win, right? And so we've designed this so there's some short-term wins for them and short-term wins for us, as well as some long-term benefits as well.
Tom, you talked about how devastating the disease can be to a swine population and what the upside win would be for Smithfield. Just take one quick sec on that, because the numbers were kind of staggering to me.
Well, what's ironic is we went into Smithfield for African swine fever, and they said, that's a Chinese problem. And our problems are with other diseases that are in swine. And so, the initial focus with them has been on things like PRRS and influenza and other kind of things that are very prevalent in the US operations. But we continue to talk to them about what we're doing in African swine fever, but it then led to us expanding what we're doing there. And earlier this year, after we announced our Smithfield collaboration, we then announced a second collaboration that involves a variety of African swine fever experts. So from MRI Global, Kansas State, North Carolina State, to bring this group together who know and have studied African swine fever for years. And there's a lot of challenges in trying to even do clinical studies with it, because obviously you need a BSL-3 facility in order to be able to do this work. And so we brought this new group together, and we've been applying for funding from the government and others to be able to advance this into clinical testing. And so that market is huge. As I mentioned to you, the market is like 700 million pigs, and today off-labeled use of vaccines in China are selling for about $10 a pig. Now that's not the long-term price, but I mean, it doesn't take, you don't need a calculator to figure out that's a big market.
It sure is. The other thing that we talked about, and I'm a little fascinated by, and I'd like you to talk about, is you're in the midst of, or have created a new co, and part of your attention on that is for your investors. I'd like you to say a little bit more about that as well.
Well, again, going back to African swine fever, coming out of that, talking to some of our partners, we said, if we can do African swine fever, we can do anything. And so we looked at what was going on with SARS-CoV. And I think, what has gone on with SARS-CoV over the past few months has been a phenomenal story for the life science industry. I think everyone involved should be very proud of what's going on. But whenever you do anything quickly, you can't always cover all of your bases. And what we've seen emerge were some significant gaps in what's being done. And we felt that we could fill many of those gaps with the next generation SARS-CoV vaccine. But as we transition from being an animal health company to a life science company that's doing human health, those are different businesses, right? And so you can get, despite the time it's taken us to get there, you can get into the animal health and commercially relatively quickly. But the human health is a very long gestation period, right? And so we thought, number one, we should organize this differently. And so let's put the rights to our next generation SARS-CoV vaccine into a new co that will be 50% owned by MBFT and 50% owned by our investors, our existing investors. And that way it has two benefits. One, you can position this as, here we have a very realistic exit opportunity for you, because exit opportunities are the number one question every investor has. When I get my money back, right? And by setting it up the way we have, we're doing it in a very tax efficient manner as well, because the existing investors will then own shares in the new co as well. So if we sell it or license it, half the proceeds from that will go directly to our investors as a part of a long-term capital gain. So they get the benefit of that. If we wanted to return something to them in a different manner, it would be paid out as a dividend, and the company would pay tax on it. They would pay ordinary income tax. So from a tax standpoint, it favors the investor. And from just, quite frankly, I can then point to that and say, look, you want to know what an exit looks like? Here's an example of what an exit looks like. So I worked on this with Chris Cashman and the board for a period of time, and we came up with what we thought would be a good deal for the investors, a good deal for us, and one that would help to move us forward.
Tom, we've covered a lot of turf today, and I know we could talk all afternoon, but you've got other important things to do to keep the business going strong, and maybe even get a few minutes out on the lake. So let's wrap it up, but thank you so much. Boy, you've given us great insight into so much about your company, where you're headed, and very excited about the future.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate this opportunity. This is a lot of